I remember the first time I ever heard one of my songs on the radio. It was a summer night. It was 1994. I had 3 sleepy children in the back seat. My wife and I were driving down Lover's Lane, and my song Little Rock came on the radio by Colin Ray, and we almost wrecked the car. Hi, I'm Tom Douglas. I'd like to thank you for allowing songwriters to do what we do best. That's write songs and create music that becomes the very fabric of the American culture. Your fees help fuel that process and put money in our pocket, which allows us to put food on the table and shoes on babies' feet. So thank you for doing all that you do and for loving songwriters and playing our songs. You are very important to us, and we appreciate you. Thank you.
Glad you are all here and didn't party too much last night. The early crowd, the morning show crowd, we love it. Well, we're very excited. We have talent coaching with Randy Lane, 10 trends impacting morning radio coming up in just a minute. I've got a few announcements. It's your last chance to visit Texas A&M's social media headshot photo booth in the Legends hallway. They'll take a professional photo and provide you with one edited image 2 to 3 weeks after CRS. We want to thank Texas A&M for providing this great service for our CRS attendees. The hours today are from 9:30 to 11:30 and then from 2 till 4, so it's a great little free service. We'd also like to thank the Big Machine Label Group for their long-standing partnership with CRS. Once again, Big Machine is hosting today's showcase luncheon at 12 o'clock noon in the Broadway Ballroom. You're going to want to be there. The return of Sugarland, along with Brett Young, Drake White, Trent Harmon, Josh Phillips, and Tyler Rich. We greatly appreciate their commitment to country radio and for the countless hits we can't stop singing along to. Thank you, Big Machine, for that. I'd like to remind everyone that recordings of the sessions, including today's, will be available for purchase in the exhibitor hallway beside registration. And let us know how we're doing. You can rate the panel on your app immediately following the session, and you'll have a chance to win a 2019 free registration, which wouldn't be too shabby. And if you're not planning to stay for the New Faces of Country Music dinner and show and you have a ticket, we ask that you please turn in your New Faces ticket at the registration desk. It's sold out and lots of people want to go, and if you're not going to go, we want to use those tickets. Before the session starts, I just want to remind everyone to please put your cell phones in silent mode. My name is Tim Roberts from the Board of Directors in WYCD Detroit. Thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be an outstanding session. I'm super pumped about it because we have Randy Lane here, a guy who has done it all in radio. He was a general manager, a great air talent, a personality, and now a consultant. He works with some of the top talent in the business, people like Ryan Seacrest, Carson Daly, Kelly Ford, Fitz, you name it. He's done it all. He's probably working with your company. You don't even know it. But it's my distinct pleasure to bring you Randy Lane to improve your morning shows, and it's going to work.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. It is great to be back in my home state of Tennessee. I've been living in Los Angeles the last 25 years, and people sometimes will ask me, well, where are you originally from? And I say, Paris. They'll go, oh, wow, Tennessee. Any Parisians here in the audience today? 10 trends that are impacting morning radio. The number one trend, and these are in no priority order, by the way, so these are 10 trends that are impacting morning radio shows. America wants to escape the negative news cycle. I know that we all are just going through this every day where there's just one negative story after another, the Democrats, the Republicans going at each other all the time. And one of the reasons that people go to radio morning shows, especially music radio morning shows, is to escape. On TV right now, there are more than 10 new game shows on television. People want fun, they want humor, and in radio morning shows, what's really working well right now are interactive games that listeners can play along to. In their cars, they're driving to work, have a little fun. A lot of these are trivia-oriented games, and sometimes there are two listener contestants. Other times it's one of the hosts of the show going against a listener. And you're going to hear one right now from Kix 101.5 in Atlanta, Cadillac Jack and Allie Mack in the morning. And this is called You Can't Be Caddy. And Cadillac is a pop culture expert, and he goes up against the listener with 5 trivia questions.
It is time for a 20-second pop culture trivia showdown called What Can't Be Caddy. Ashley from Douglasville signed up to play. Can't Be Caddy. Text keyword caddy, C-A-D-D-Y. Can't Be Caddy. To the number 68255.
Caddy's the man you gotta be.
All right, now if you get more questions right than Caddy, you win.
Unlikely.
If Caddy gets more right than you, he wins. And remember, all ties go to Caddy because it's not called Can't Tie Caddy, it's called
Can't Be Caddy.
Your 20-second timer will start after I finish asking you the first question, okay?
All right.
All right, here we go. Me married.
Tom and Hurt.
Okay, you get the idea. And so Cadillac goes out of the studio while the contestant is answering the 5 pop trivia questions. Then he comes back in, answers the 5 to see who wins. Now, the other thing that you can do to take advantage of America wanting to escape in the morning, and this has been around for a while, but still very popular, scores high in PPM, and that's good news features. And you're going to hear one now from the 100.3 The Bull in Houston with George, Mo, and Cowboy Dave.
Can I get an amen?
Well, we love highlighting the good news here on the Morning Bull. Today's story is about 61-year-old Leslie Kahn. She is a breast cancer survivor.
Woo, Leslie!
She likes to relax in her backyard pool, do a little swimming, that kind of stuff, right?
Heck yeah.
She said recently she was out for a swim. After being in the pool for an hour or so, it was time to get out. Mm-hmm. But that's when the trouble started because she put her foot on the ladder and the ladder broke.
I had one foot on it. When I put the other foot on it, it went down. And I cracked my knee. I was thinking I might be here a while.
Yep, she's like, okay, what do I do? Here's the thing. She didn't have her cell phone.
Right.
There was nobody else home.
Oh, no.
And she said after all of the chemo treatments and stuff that she's been through, she didn't have the strength to pull herself out of the pool.
My goodness.
So she's stuck in the pool. She doesn't know what to do. Except Leslie is a smart lady. Rather than panic, she grabbed the pool cleaning pole, you know, the skimmer thing they do. She drug a chair that was way across the pool deck that just happened to have an old iPad of hers on it.
What?
She pulled it closer to her, logged into Facebook, went to her page, and labeled a post as 911 to get people's attention. Within 15 minutes, she was overrun with neighbors, even police.
Oh, my gosh.
That came and helped pull her out of the pool.
Oh, my goodness.
She said, I didn't know if it would work or not.
No.
I had no idea if somebody would see it. But she said first her neighbor showed up, then the police showed up, and then another neighbor and all of that. And she said they tried a lot of different things before they finally just went and got a step ladder and put down in the pool.
And I just climbed out. Happily ever after at that point. People keep saying, well, I bet you can laugh about it now. I was laughing about it then. What else can you do?
Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Okay, a variation on that theme. The Woody Show, which is a syndicated show on a lot of rock stations, they do a feature called Best Week Ever on Friday. And on Fridays, they take the 3 best stories from listeners who had a great week, and then they have listeners vote on that through social media, through phone calls and everything. And one of the ones that I heard recently, the listener that won with the best week ever had her identity stolen. She ended up tracking down the person in a hotel, called the police, they arrested them. She goes back to work and got a surprise $3,000 bonus. So, best week ever.
Can I get an
Trend number 2, recycle more content. In Nielsen, whether it's diary or PPM, Doing your best content more often wins. Just like in music, by rotating your hottest hits is going to get you more ratings. The same thing happens. So let me ask you a question. Anybody in the audience, like if you have one great priceless content segment, one great segment, what percentage of the audience do you think will hear that segment? Anybody have an idea? If it's heard one time, what percentage of your audience do you think will hear that? Definitely less than 10%. Maybe 7 or 8% of your audience will hear that. So if you have a great segment, you can easily repeat that 3 times, a different hour, a different half hour, or a different day. And what about benchmarks? This comes up a lot. So do we have fixed time benchmarks, or do you let benchmarks float? Well, the definition of a benchmark is that is something that your show is known for. Now, a lot of people will, like, every morning at 7:20 will have a particular benchmark, which is great if that is A-plus content. But it's got to be A-level content if you're going to play something at the same time every day, because the vast majority of listeners listen exactly at the same time every day based on their schedule. And if you are doing that every day at the same time, let's say at 7:20, and if it's a great benchmark, you want to repeat that in the 8 o'clock hour and the 9 o'clock hour, for example, so you expose that to a greater percentage of your audience. If it's not an A-level content segment, feature, benchmark that you have on your show, you're better off floating that. And the value of floating that different hours, different half hours throughout the morning is that a greater percentage of your audience is going to hear that segment. One of the questions that we get a lot of times too is like, okay, well, if you have a great segment, how often can you repeat that? And the first thing you want to do is check with your program director, what is your P1 TSL? And then add a little bit of time to that. And in most cases, you could easily repeat something once an hour. Even 45 minutes later is not too soon to repeat something. Trend number 3, minimize app content. There is a lot of information that you can get on your phone. Weather.com, that's one of the first things I do every morning is check the weather. Traffic apps like Waze, Google Maps, and of course we have ESPN if you want to check scores. So one of the things that we recommend for morning shows is to go very light and very short on traffic, weather, sports scores, and that sort of thing. Now in radio today, and we've seen this definitely in the PPM markets, that traffic is on radio morning shows primarily for revenue purposes. And so if you do have traffic, you want to make sure you keep that traffic really short, typically run it at the end of the content segment. Anybody, I'd like to ask, how many morning show people do we have in the audience today? Would anyone like to share one idea that you've had, something that's on your show that did not come off your phone? Something that you could not get on the internet. Any original ideas? Okay, here's one. And there's a mic right over here so people can. Tell us where you're from. Your name, what station?
Jamie Patrick, KDRK-FM in Spokane. Something that we started doing after my co-host left me was, now that I'm doing a one-man morning show, I've decided that as the host, I'm going to make my listeners the star again of morning radio.
Yeah.
So what we do every morning at 6:30 is we do a thing called the first interview of the day. And you hear first interview on a morning show, you think great celebrity or something like that, but we take that moment to get to know a new listener. And that doesn't come off our phone or anything like that, but they get 3 minutes, we get to know them. They walk away actually with a great prize from the radio station, and it's just for spending some time with us in the morning.
Very good idea. Excellent. So the point is, more original content and less app content on the air. Another trend in morning radio, serial content. Again, if you go back to look at Nielsen, diary markets, or PPM markets, tune-ins, getting people to tune in more often is what typically builds ratings. And today, People love binge watching, whether it's This Is Us, Game of Thrones, and that sort of thing. Episodic content is something that will really drive ratings. It also creates a lot of interest in your morning show as well. Let's say that you have a celebrity interview with Dierks Bentley. You know you're going to have Dierks, what is today? Wednesday. So this morning at 7:50, you talk about, we're going to be interviewing Dierks Bentley tomorrow morning exactly at this same time, because you know that people that are listening can be listening again tomorrow at the same time. They can also choose another radio station as well. So you want to build up that interview, pose one of the best questions that you're going to ask Dierks Bentley tomorrow morning at this same time, and then making sure that you're teasing that throughout the morning. And the idea, if you can get somebody to come back to your show tomorrow to create more tune-ins, you're going to raise the ratings on your morning show. Some of the other ways that morning shows are creating serial content, there's a feature that a few shows around the country are doing. It's called Why Should We Call You on Monday? For example, on Friday, a listener calls in that they have a person that their fiance. They're going to meet the parents over the weekend, but they had met the parents once before, but the guy kind of got off on the wrong foot, and they're going to meet the parents this time and tell them that they're engaged to be married. Then they called the person back on Monday to get the follow-up to the story and creating another tune-in. You do it at the same time, let's say 8:20 on Friday, tune in Monday morning at 8:20 and find out what happened. Now, another form of serial content is multiple segment content within your show. Let's say you set something up at 7:10 and you pay it off at 7:20, and the key is at the end of the first segment, you want to make sure you're doing a great tease to carry those people over for another 10 minutes, another quarter hour to hear the payoff. What you're going to hear right here is Brooke and Jubal, which is a syndicated show. And they do a feature that a lot of morning shows do called Second Date Update. And the idea is, if you haven't heard that feature, two people got together for a date. They thought it went great. At least one person thought it went great. And they tried to get in touch with the other person for a second date. Hasn't happened yet. And here's the first segment.
And so after that moment, you know, she's about to say something. As I see she's about to say something, I move my index finger to her lips and go, shh.
Oh, God.
No. And then I kiss her.
Are you serious?
You do not do that. I just rolled my eyes.
And this actually works for you?
It works. Yeah, I know you guys are like laughing it up and think it's ridiculous, but I swear to God it works.
All right, so you guys kissed after you did that, and how did everything end with you?
Said I'll call you, and she said cool.
So you haven't heard anything from her at all?
No.
Well, we're going to play a song, come back, call her, and get your second date update, all right?
Cool.
Okay, here's part two.
Hello.
Hey, Brittany, how are you? This is Jubal from Brooke and Jubal in the Morning. You recently went out on a date with one of our listeners. Well, for the way he tells it, everything went amazing.
I was telling him a very personal story about my parents. My dad recently passed away.
Oh, that's sad.
And I'm telling him this, and then he has the audacity to shush me.
Oh,
are you serious?
That was when it happened?
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. And not only that, after he shushed me, he kissed me for like 10 seconds.
So
I don't think that worked too well. Female focus. Trend number 5. It is a myth that women don't like to hear other women on the radio. This is something that's been a convention in radio for a long time, but that is definitely changing. There is a wide acceptance of hearing women on the radio today by both men and women. It really comes down to, if you have talent, people will connect with you and they will like you. I have 3 millennial daughters, and when I mentioned to them that, well, a lot of people in radio, especially in management, think that females don't like to hear other females on the air. They said, that's ridiculous. I can't believe that. Well, today we have a lot more female hosts, a lot more female co-hosts, and I think you're going to see that trend continue in the future. How many female hosts and co-hosts do we have here today? Great. All right, we have one right here joining us. Your numbers are growing. Trend number 6 is pre-produced content. There are a lot more morning shows today that are recording, editing, and producing content before that it goes on the air. And as I mentioned a minute ago, interviews, we always recommend that if at all possible, that you record that interview so that you're able to edit that, move things around, because one of the things that we know in interviews from the PPM data is that a lot of interviews don't do well, and that's simply because of the way they are executed, and particularly the way the interview starts, is that you can't screw around too long in the beginning before really getting to the meat of the interview. So if you edit that you can move your best question around to the first part of the interview. Now, other situations, like as I mentioned a second ago about recycling content, well, the second and third time you play that, there's chances are that you could probably edit some of that, sharpen that up a little bit, and so that's a form of pre-production as well. Street audio, great way to interact with the audience, come back and making sure you edit that down so that it flows well, so that it's tight, connects with the audience. And any kind of stage content that you're doing certainly requires a lot of pre-production on that, and so even a great story. If you have a great personal story that's going to take a little bit longer maybe than a typical story would, enhancing that story with audio and sound effects can really make that stick and give it more impact and more memorability. Why is there a goldfish? Microsoft does a study every couple of years about the average attention span in North America. The latest one, I think, was in 2016, a couple of years ago. The average attention span is now 8 seconds. Now, the average time that if you click on a link and you get the pinwheel going around before people give up on that's about 3 seconds. So, in the morning, in particular, you are dealing with a very short attention span. And one of the things that we recommend that's a trend that has been changed in morning radio is starting every content segment with a headline rather than the traditional preamble of 101.5, kicks Cadillac Jack in the morning at 7:35. High today is going to be 74, low tonight 45, with about a 10% chance of rain. By the time you do all of that stuff, 8 seconds has already gone by. Now, P1 listeners will stay with you no matter what you do, but in order to grow your ratings, you've got to convert P2 listeners, P3 listeners, people that are new listeners, not fans of your show yet. They're going to give you about 8 seconds before they give up on you and either switch stations or mentally check out on you. Anybody here, does anyone here start their content segments with the name of the station, name of the show, slogan, time, weather, and that sort of thing? There's one, okay. Now, what you can do, once you do a headline, that's okay. Starting when you go back on the air, start with a headline. For example, if you're going into entertainment news, rather than starting with that, come right out of music. 11 celebrities slamming Justin Timberlake for his performance at the Super Bowl halftime show. That's the entertainment news. Then you can come back at that point, once you've got the hook in and you've hooked the listeners, then you can come back, name of the station, the call letters, and that sort of thing. Okay, let's move on then. I want to make sure we got that. Now, there are two critical points of tune-out that we see, and whether it's a PPM or a diary market. When you start talking out of music, and that's why you want to start with a headline, and when you stop talking, particularly if you're going into a commercial stop set. You want to always end with a tease for what's coming up next so that you hold people through those commercials. Even if you're going into a song a lot of times, you can have the best researched music in the world, but there's still going to be songs that people don't like, they're tired of. It reminds them of a relationship they got out of. Now, here's an example of what we call a tease stager, where the content segment ends. What you're going to hear here, this is Chaz and AJ in New Haven, Connecticut, and they just got through with an interview, and then you'll hear a produced stager. He comes back on with a tease.
It's so weird.
It is very
Yeah, there's
very
some
weird.
other thing going on that is more than what
Thank
we
God.
can understand. Yeah. Well, thanks for what you do, man. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Coming up next on Chaz and AJ.
In dumbass news, a naked man tries to steal a police car.
When news breaks.
One other thing about the short attention span. One of the things that you want to plan for during your content segments, once you engage the attention of the audience, is regain their attention. And one of the ways of doing that is what we call pattern disruption, or breaking the pattern. And one of the best things that you can do with that is audio. We are an audio medium, so look for opportunities to play audio that adds to a discussion that you're talking about. That will break it up. It gets people's attention. Starting a story. Stories get people's attention too. Making a lightning rod type extreme statement, a very strong statement or a challenge to the audience. That will get the attention of the audience and also break the pattern. And one of the simplest things that you can do in the world is pausing. The silence will draw people in too. And in radio, many people in radio, especially if you started in top 40 radio, have been trained to have no dead air whatsoever, but actually your statements, your discussions, your points will stand out if there is a pause before or after that. The top TV shows and pop culture information are declining. They are going down. What percentage of your audience, anybody have an idea of what percentage of your audience on your morning show do you think watched the Super Bowl this past Sunday? Anybody have an idea? You would think that would be pretty high. I just checked that this year's Super Bowl drew, I believe it was 103 million or maybe 103.4 million viewers. It was down a little bit from last year. Last year was 111 million. And I think the highest Super Bowl viewing audience is about 120 million. So, how many people are in the United States? About 327 million people. So what that means is less than a third of the population watched the Super Bowl, which is by far the biggest TV event of the year. Nothing else is even close. Now, back a few years ago when American Idol was at its height, it was drawing about 30 to 35 million viewers as the #1 show for that week. Well, today the #1 shows pull between 10 and 17 or 18 million. I think This Is Us will sometimes hit about 17 million viewers. So what does that mean to your audience? That means that maybe 5% of your audience. That's going to vary by format, but not that much. So if you're going to talk about a television show, if you're going to talk about pop culture, make sure that you do a very brief premise for that. And playing a little clip of audio will bring a lot more people into it because you can't assume that everybody even watched the Super Bowl. So that's one thing you definitely want to keep in mind. Now, with regard to pop culture, there has been a decline in the interest of pop culture, even though it's still popular. In the last few years, with all the reality TV shows, there's been a lot of people with their 15 minutes of fame, and you don't have the universal stars, the Angelinas and Brad Pitts that we once had before. And so it's still important to do that, but making sure that you just do the stories that are really engaging to the audience. And back to the political thing, there's so much drama going on in the political world today. Pop culture stories are not nearly as entertaining. And the problem is, though, with music stations is you can't talk about politics. It is a no-win situation because people are coming to you for escape. And so even if you're doing a segment like country music news or Nashville news, don't focus so much on the announcements of albums coming out, even tours, because people do follow their favorite artists online and they already have a lot of that information. You want to make sure that you're focusing on stories that have action. I mean, an interesting story recently was Blake Shelton taking Gwen Stefani's kids on an ATV ride and teaching them. They came back all muddy and everything. That's a more interesting story than a simple announcement. On-demand content is a trend. Right now, digital advertising is higher than radio and television advertising. And one of the things that we definitely recommend is that you have a podcast. Now, a podcast can be defined as you posting any of your audio from your show, some of the best segments of your show, online. You can simply do that on your website and social media. A lot of shows will have, for example, 15 minutes of their top content from that day. It could be 10, or it could be one segment that you post starting on your website and social media. And if you want to move on from there, eventually of creating an original content with podcasts, and you want to go on iTunes or Stitcher, that is great as well. But on-demand content is something that is very important. Social media is important as well, but definitely you want to make sure that you are posting some of your best content online. We live in an on-demand world, and people expect to have content from your show 24/7.
Hear Kicks 101.5 on your Amazon Echo or Dot.
Just say, Alexa, enable the Kicks 101.5 skill.
Then, anytime you want to get your kicks,
just say, Alexa, play Kicks 101.5.
Now playing Kicks 101.5.
Now, we've heard a lot about that the last couple of days here, and that the smart speakers are one of the ways that it's going to help bring back in-home listening to radio. Right now, most of the listening to radio takes place in the car and in the workplace, but if you don't have any production on your morning show on your radio station like the one that you just heard from Kicks in Atlanta, highly recommend that you do that, and it's going to help your show and the radio station as well. So many platforms, so little time. It's so different today than it was even 5, 10 years ago. Not only do you have your show, but you do have podcasts. A lot of you are blogging, social media that takes up a lot of time. Of course, you have promotions and events that are going on at your radio station and prepping your show. So there's a lot of times. And one of the big questions that we get from morning shows a lot is, how do we prioritize this? How do we balance all the time between all of these platforms that we have today? I want to quote Lori Lewis, who's the digital person for Cumulus now, and I agree with her 100%. Take care of the mothership first, and the mothership is your show. So make sure that is the number one priority. And the second priority would be on-demand content and making sure that you're making some of your content available 24/7 on demand to listeners. They expect that. Social media would be third. Social media is important. However, what we found out that likes and having a large number of followers does not necessarily translate into ratings. So it is a great way to expand and extend your brand. It's a great way to deepen your character by connecting with your listeners through social media. And then after social media, it goes down from there to, if you have time if you're a good writer and you can blog, that certainly is another way of extending your personality brand. And of course, you have to take care of your local events and promotions and everything too. So just to recap, We have time for some questions. If anyone has any questions about any points that I made, I'll be happy to answer those. Challenge me on anything you disagree with. So, anybody have a question? We have a couple of mics here. If you have a question, to step up to the mic and fire away. Tim Roberts may have a question.
Yeah, I'm going to break the silence. You know, a lot of times, if you're a program director, you're coaching teams, you know. So when you coach a team, do you recommend coaching them individually, together, both? How do you go about that usually?
As far as coaching teams?
Yeah.
We do both. We think it's important to have some one-on-one time with each one of the cast players on a morning show, because there are things that they will talk to you about one-on-one maybe they wouldn't say in front of the group there. And then also having a session with the entire show is important too. Now, one of the things, Tim, that comes up a lot, that we run into situations where that some program directors will have a daily meeting with the morning show, and there's a few that will let that meeting go for like an hour, which drives morning shows crazy. So, like, God, I got all this prep I got to do and everything. And really, meeting every day is really not a good idea because if you're meeting periodically, then that gives you a little time to work on the points that you talked about in the meeting and everything. Having a meeting every day, sometimes you can get a little too self-conscious and thinking too much about the show.
Yeah, I try and vary also what we do in the meetings and not every day listening to audio, and, you know, it gets to be a beatdown. So I think mixing it up about what you talk about in the meetings could be creative planning or doing different things, not always doing the same thing over and over again. And it's easy to get into those kind of bad habits as a boss.
I do think it's a good idea to touch base. If you're a programmer in the office, here in the audience today, touch base with the morning show and maybe a compliment on something that they did. And one thing about feedback, too, if you happen to be a program director in the room, it's always better to divide your feedback, and that is to say, point out the things that are doing well on the show and why that worked, and then separate that, let a little time pass, talk about something else, and then talk about the things that they need to work on to make the show better. One of the things that I learned a long time ago, if I were to say, hey, Tim, you did a great job with that interview, but the way you got into it, and the only thing that person's going to hear is what came after the but. Question.
That's pretty close to what I was thinking, actually. I'm Kim Leslie from here in Nashville, and spent about the last 10 years in the #1 morning show in town. I can tell you, I agree that you don't need to meet every day, because that does nothing but let the air out of the bubble little by little by little. My question was about the pop culture decline. Because even if, a third of the audience, I think we determined, watch the Super Bowl, right, about that? The ones who don't watch, does that mean they don't want to know? Or are they just not interested at all? Or is it because they want to know what their friends saw this weekend?
Yeah, and there is still an interest in pop culture. And I'm not saying don't talk about the Super Bowl or anything. What we're saying is, like, okay, it's been a convention in morning shows to have an entertainment report every hour. And every hour to have sometimes 4 or 5 stories. What we're saying is that because there's not as much interest, still a lot of interest, just zero down to sometimes 1 to 3 stories that you would do, and mainly key on the stories that have action, that have drama, that's something that happened. For example, just going on and just reeling off the winners on the Grammys is okay, but it's not that interesting. But if something happened at the Grammys, maybe it's the Kesha Me Too thing, or Hillary reading, out of the Fire and Fury book, that's more interesting to people than it is just reeling off the winners. So we're just saying that and also announcements type of thing is not as interesting as action-oriented stories.
Can I follow up with just one thing?
Yeah.
For example, with American Idol now being on ABC, my first reaction, and other people I've talked to on the air said, yeah, who cares? it was sort of like it came and went, and how can we miss you if you don't go away? So that's the kind of pop culture stuff that I hear a lot about in its past tense, even though it's actually hasn't even occurred yet, as far as having it on ABC. Is that something that, again, do you want to talk about it just to say you know what you're talking about? Or
That's
is it a waste
something you
of
do a
time?
one-sentence story on and move on. That's it. With those kind of stories, you just want to make sure that they're done very quickly and do not devote a lot of time to it. And one of the things we recommend to shows too, if you have a feature or a benchmark that's an entertainment report, or if it's country news or whatever, only do them when you have good content. Again, it is about the moment and doing your best content more often. Hey, if you don't have any good stories that day, then don't do it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Who else has a question? Over here.
I just wanted to ask a quick question in regards to the scale of prioritizing with your morning show, or even with your on-air staff overall. Where would you stand on, in this day and age, the value of getting actually physically out in front of people from that standpoint on the priority list?
I think that is valuable, and there's two things about that. We have some shows where the sales department are constantly asking them to go out, and sometimes it's a handful of people. Pick and choose your situations to make sure that you're going to go out in front of people where there's at least a sizable amount of people that are going to be there. And yeah, that's valuable to go out there, shake hands, meet people and everything. There's nothing better than somebody meeting an air personality in person. That is great. It's just that you don't want to take up so much of your time that you're running yourself ragged.
Burnout factors, obviously, and things like that. But I didn't know in the world we live in these days what the priority, if that still had the same impact that it once had. Probably not the same, but probably still quite a bit of an impact, I would say.
It does. It's not the same as it once was, because you didn't have all of these other platforms before. Now you do have these other platforms. But just make sure you're very selective on the things that you do so that you maximize your time in front of people. Hey, but you have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, or 3 o'clock in the morning, or whatever. All the prep that it takes, it's a long day, and so you don't want to, beat yourself to death going to every little thing all the time.
Thank you.
That make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Yes. What's your name? Where are you from?
Jen, the Bull, Portland, Oregon. Can you dive into female focus a little bit more?
Okay. What about the female?
I guess because we personally are a 3-part show. So where does a female fit in the dynamic of 2 other guys? Like, what can we do in the show to showcase us, get the female listener engaged and listening more, to be loved by the community?
You want to keep in mind that your role is that microphone that you have is a microphone for all of the women listening to your show. And so you want to make sure that you're reflecting what they feel. And especially if it's a radio station targeted at females, which most country stations are, assuming you're on a country radio station, then you should have a fairly prominent role if you're on there with 2 other guys. What you don't want to be is what it used to be, the giggle girl that was on there to laugh at the guy's jokes and everything, or just to make 1 or 2 word comments. From a role standpoint, that's one of the things that we really pay attention to. Like, let's get the roles on this show clearly defined. And on a female station, ideally you would be second mic on the show, second chair on the show. But making sure, even if you're third and if you're new and there's an established 2 male players on there, you want to make sure that you have ample mic time too, to be able to connect with the audience, because the women listening want to hear from you.
Follow-up question. Do you think that benchmarks for women are important?
Benchmarks for women?
Like specifically, like if I did a feel-good news story or something about pets once a week, or something that specifically is mine or females on the shows.
Well, it doesn't have to be a benchmark or a feature. It could be just that you're just bringing content to the show. Now, if you want to put it in the form of a feature or a benchmark, that is a way that will get it to stand out more, that if there's a particular feature that you have. I would just make sure that you have a feature, that there's a platform that you have on the show so that it highlights you, because at that point, your role switches rather than to be a reactor to the host of the show, for example. You're hosting a feature, and the other two guys are going to be reacting to what you have to say. So I think the important thing is that you have some kind of a feature platform. And it could be, if it's, if it's one that's really engaging and entertaining, that's pertaining to women, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I think we're good. Thank you very much.